So I was accused the other day of telling dad jokes. Eric, do you know how you can tell if a joke is a dad joke?
No, tell me.
It's apparent. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome to the Paperback Warrior Podcast and our very last double-digit episode. I'm your co-host, Eric, and I want to thank you for tuning in to what we consider to be the best vintage fiction podcast in the world, maybe even the galaxy. This show is a flagship of our blog at paperbackwarrior.com. We cover genres like crime fiction, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, pulp, gothics, westerns, military fiction, but our main dish is 20th century literature, preferably in paperback, but we have sporadic appetizers to keep you fed on modern novels as well. Our show isn't protected by a paywall, but we still have expenses like cloud storage, podcast hosting, our domain, and little advertising that we do. If you like us enough, you can visit the desktop version of paperbackwarrior.com, click the donations icon in the top right-hand corner. If you've got some spare change and want to contribute, we're going to put it to good use. If not, just don't even worry about it. Your eyes and ears are plenty enough currency. Tom is my partner in crime, writing brother, research assistant, coffee maker, good buddy, and most importantly, my co-host for today's show. So Tom, tell our listeners what's on tap today.
Our feature today is on an author named James McKimmey, a mid-20th century writer that both Eric and I agree is an excellent writer. He authored stories, novellas, full-length original paperbacks in the Western, science fiction, and adventure genres, but really excelled and found his calling in the world of crime fiction literature. He enjoyed a 50-year career and wrote so many fantastic novels that we can't wait to tell you about today. In addition, we're going to be offering capsule reviews of some of McKimmey's finest literary work. I'm going to be reviewing a spy novel from 1984 called The Girl from Addis by Ted Alberry. Eric, you're going to be reviewing a paperback called House of Evil from 1954. You claim it is not a gothic novel, so I'm curious to hear your review. But first,
Tom, I've got two books right here from Starkhouse Press that are set for release in August of 2022. In case you're listening to this in like 2028 or something. These two books come out next month, and the first one I want to tell you about is by A.S. Fleischman. We've reviewed 5 of his books here on the blog, plus we did an entire feature on him on episode 87 of this show. That was back in September of last year, 2021. Starkhouse has been reprinting his books left and right, and this was one I've been waiting for. Blood Alley was originally published in 1955 by Fawcett Gold Medal and was adapted into a beloved film starring John Wayne the same year. In fact, Fleischman wrote the screenplay that was based on his own novel. It's a nautical adventure tale about a ship captain who's freed from a Red China prison by a village that needs his help. They want him to take them out of China through a dangerous area in the Straits of Formosa to the freedom of Hong Kong. But there's a catch, and I don't want to tell you what it is. You'll have to discover it for yourself. Again, this is Blood Alley, and it's out next month through Starkhouse Press's imprint, Black Gat Books, and it's got a really cool cover. The second one I've got here, let me pull it out here, is twofer under the Starkhouse Crime Classics banner by an author named John Trinian. Trinian's childhood was spent with a neighbor you may have heard of named John Steinbeck. Trinian later hung out in the San Francisco area in the 1950s with the beat writers before adopting the name Ezekiel Marco, and he had gained success writing for television shows like The Rockford Files, Kolchak the Night Stalker, and Mission Impossible. Outside of television writing, Trinian had 7 novels published, all but one written under the name John Trinian. The 2 novels in this particular collection are The Big Grab, originally published by Pyramid in 1960, and The Savage Breast. And that's not an error, by the way. I thought it was Savage Beast. But sure enough, it's The Savage Breast, originally published by Fawcett Gold Medal in 1961. The Big Grab, as you can imagine, is a heist novel about a guy who spends 14 years in prison. He gets out, and he plans a heist at a gambling joint with his former cellmate. Doesn't sound like a great idea, but I'm sure it's a great book. The Savage Breast concerns a young girl who lives with a husband that was provided to her by her wealthy father. The girl's frightened by both her husband and her father, but then has a run-in with the husband when she kicks him out of her life. There's another guy involved and his crazy stepbrother to complicate matters even more. I'm sure it's great. I mean, Gold Medal normally publish the best of the best. It even sounds a bit edgy, but both of these are in one volume, and they're out next month by Starkhouse Press.
Yeah, I reviewed a Trinian novel on Paperback Warrior called Scratch a Thief that came out in 1961. I remember liking it. It was a heist novel, and I think it was later adapted into a 1965 film called Once a Thief, starring Anne Margaret and Jack Palance. So it's good the Starkhouse is continuing to beat that drum.
Yeah, and real fast, I forgot something. So real fast, Starkhouse Press is going to be publishing another Lionel White twofer in October. They've been putting out his books here lately quite a bit. It's going to be his novels Jailbreak and Mexico Run. And I read and reviewed Mexico Run a couple of years ago, and Starkhouse asked if I would write an intro to the book, and I said yes. And I'm hoping my buddy Tom here, who's really a resident Lionel White aficionado, will collaborate a little with me to make sure it's just right.
Yeah, Lionel White's awesome. I'm actually, as of the day of this recording, I'm in the middle of his book, Invitation to Violence, and I'm really enjoying that a lot.
Wait, we're reading, you're reading a Lionel White book right now?
As we speak.
I am too. I'm reading Jailbreak.
Oh, well, small world.
Yeah.
Well, you're getting paid to write a Starkhouse introduction. I'm just doing it for the love of the game.
Okay,
so I got a couple books I want to tell you about. I recently received 2 books from Oregon-based reprint house Armchair Fiction. They have a huge selection of crime, science fiction, and horror reprints. Some are doubles, some are just trade paperbacks. They always like to keep the old-time cover art, so the books are just beautiful artifacts preserving history, and they just look good in your library. I'm going to tell you about these 2 releases that were sent to me. I have not read either of them. I'm going to hand this to you first. This one's called Farewell to Passion by Day Keane from 1952. The novel was also released as The Passion Murders by Avon in 1954 with a different cover. It's about a Hollywood prosecutor who is married to a starlet. She leaves him for a hunky young actor, and she later finds herself in trouble and comes crawling back to her ex-husband looking for help. Like a lot of Day Keane books, I heard that this one is overplotted and with way too much going on, but I still may give it a shot. I tend to like Day Keane books. And again, the book's called Farewell to Passion by Day Keane. Let me hand this next one to you. It is called it's called Good Luck to the Corpse by Max Murray from 1951. Now, Murray was an Australian journalist who became a world traveler. This book takes place in Nice on the French Riviera. It seems to be a mystery about a murder or series of murders surrounding a casino in Nice. I heard it's a very straightforward and easy-to-read book. And again, it's called Good Luck to the Corpse by Max Murray. And as you can see, they're both beautiful-looking books, right?
Yeah, they are. They're gorgeous. And let me ask you a question. Armchair Fiction normally puts these out as a 2-in-1 with the old ace flip thing.
Yeah, I mean, they some of their books are singles, some are doubles. The latest batch of books that they've cranked out appear to be singles, which is, you don't get as much for your money, but the font's a little bigger. So as an old man whose eyes are failing him, I guess I appreciate the big easy eye font.
You had mentioned with Gil Brewer on the last episode, you said his bibliography is kind of hit or miss, and I think Day Keane is too.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so as well. And the fact that this is a Day Keane novel that hasn't already been republished by Starkhouse tells me maybe it's not the top of the heap. But who knows? Hey, they sent it to me for free, so we probably shouldn't disparage the
Right.
good people at Armchair Fiction who are sending me free books to review.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, what do you say? We want to get to the feature now?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump in. I'm excited for this one.
So Tom and I have both been thrilled with the literary work of James McKimmey. He authored 17 novels and hundreds of short stories from the pulp era through the 1950s and 1960s. He had a masterful prose and could easily contend with the likes of John D. MacDonald, David Goodis, and Jim Thompson, and I would even argue that some of his books were better than his contemporaries. Hopefully this feature will introduce you to this amazing author, or at the very least, just remind McKimmey fans and readers how great he really was. So James Earl McKimmey Jr. was born in 1923 in Holdrege, Nebraska. He grew up there in the small town of Red Cloud, Nebraska, and he attended Omaha Central High School. He attended college at the University of Nebraska, but his stay there was short-lived because World War II was happening. So McKimmey gets drafted into the Army and serves in the 102nd Infantry Division for 3 years. After the war, McKimmey's education continued abroad at the American University in France, then back home to the University of San Francisco and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. From what I can gather, he graduated with a degree in architecture. He moved to California and sold his first short story in 1948. And he was quoted at the time saying,
"I cared to do nothing as an occupation except write fiction."
McKimmey's first published stories featured a hero named Kigor. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. Ki-Gor. It's essentially a Tarzan clone. And that hero headlined the Jungle Stories pulp, which is not to be confused with the 1931 Jungle Stories. These stories were under the John Peter Drummond byline, but that's just a house name that was owned by the publisher, Fiction House, to ensure that there was going to be a steady stream of stories pouring in. The real authors included John Murray Reynolds, Dan Cushman, James McKimmey, Stanley Mullen, W. Scott Peacock, and Robert Turner. McKimmey continued writing short stories into the 1950s. I was able to locate his list of shorts online, and it goes all the way back to 1952. He sold short stories to the likes of The Avalonian, Planet Stories, Tales of Space Conquest, America Magazine, Texas Rangers, Argosy, and If Magazine, or what some refer to as Worlds of If. My count, he sold about 30 short stories before his first full-length novel was published. That first book was The Perfect Victim, published by Dell in 1957. I reviewed the novel on the blog, and I really liked it. It's about a young, beautiful waitress that's murdered in a small town. The narrative examines a cast of characters that are likely to be suspects, like the banker, sheriff, town bully, and so forth. A traveling salesman finds himself caught up in the town's murder and, of course, becomes a suspect himself. In 2017, Starkhouse Press reprinted this book as a 2-in-1 with the author's 1959 novel Winner Take All, which was also published by Dell and also published, or I should say also reviewed here at Paperback Warrior by you, Tom.
Yeah, I read Winner Take All. It was great. A guy named Mark Steele. He's a blue-collar, no-nonsense man of adventure in San Francisco. He learns that he has a wealthy twin brother named Bird. Bird surprises Steele with a visit and wants Steele to pose as him to negotiate a settlement on a large gambling debt that he owes to the mob. Steele is more comfortable in a world of violence and unpredictability. McKimmey backs the story with hard-boiled crime tropes like thuggish mobsters, a sexy femme fatale or two, and a twisty double-cross plot device. It is a blast of a story. It's violent, sexy, compelling, and it's definitely well worth your time. And again, that book is Winner Take All by James McKimmey.
So McKimmey marries his first wife, Marty, and the two of them move to Lake Tahoe. And it's here that McKimmey continued to live and write for the next 50 years. And man, he went on a tear and just never stopped writing. By 1957, he has his first book published, and his short stories move right up to a broader scale, if not better. Publications like Manhunt, Cosmopolitan, Red Book, Rogue, Mike Shane Mystery Magazine, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Good Housekeeping, and so forth. There's hundreds and hundreds of short stories from 1948 through 1994, and as I noticed, most of them came out of Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, which I think were about 40 of his short stories published there. We already discussed McKimmey's first two published novels, The Perfect Victim and Winner Take All. His third published novel was one I just recently read called Cornered, and that's cornered with an exclamation mark. It was originally published by Dell in 1960, and the setup is this. There's a guy named Tony running a California mob family, and he wants his chief rival dead, but instead of allowing his premier gunman to do the job, Tony takes it upon himself to do it, and he doesn't have the experience of being just a really, clever, great hitman, so he doesn't think of witnesses. So when Tony pulls the trigger to snuff out his rival, a young woman named Anne just happens to be walking by. So Tony's arrested. He goes to prison based on Anne's testimony. And as Cornered begins, Tony is just a few hours away from eating cyanide via California's taxpayers. However, the really cool caveat here is that Tony has placed a hit on Anne. So if his guy Bill, who's rumored to be the best gunman west of the Mississippi River, can track down and murder Anne before Tony dies, Tony will filter out a password through the prison so Bill can go and collect $50,000 for the job. Tony, he's going to die happy knowing that the woman who put him behind bars is being killed on the same day. Alternatively, if Bill can't get the job done, Tony goes to his grave as a begrudged man, and Bill earns nothing. So the book has Bill in this small Nebraska town hunting Anne, but having to contend with the town's average citizens, like the diner owner, the pastor, the banker, the doctor. This book is a masterpiece, and it reminded me of the thuggish writing style of Bill Pronzini. And you owe it to yourself to read Cornered. And thankfully, Starkhouse Press reprinted it for you. They reprinted this in 2016 as a 2-in-1 with another of McKimmey's novels called The Long Ride. And Tom, you read that one too, I believe.
Oh, man, did I. I loved The Long Ride. It was McKimmey's 5th novel, published by Dell in 1965. In the book, a group of 7 travelers ride share in a station wagon from a fictional town called Loma City to San Francisco over several days. The ride share is brought together by a classified ad. Now, this was long before Uber and Lyft. The opening chapters set the scene with a violent bank robbery and $100,000 in lost cash recovered by a one-armed innocent bystander. The idea that the bank robber and the dude who found the cash would happen to answer the same classified ad, confining them to the same station wagon, seems to be an unbelievable coincidence that's reasonably explained later in the narrative. More than one passenger in the car is not who they claim to be, and those reveals make for the most satisfying elements of this paperback. And there's alliances that form over this long car ride that are both real and manipulative that just kept me turning the pages long after the normal employed people should have been going to bed at night. I stayed up so late reading this book. It had a real Alfred Hitchcock feel to it, and I'm surprised it was never adapted into a film because most of the movie takes place in a station wagon and on the road. It was just a great book. Again, the book's called The Long Ride. As you know, Eric, McKimmey had a lot of novels that were optioned for film, but they just never seemed to make it into production. Maybe that's another reason why he's not as well known as his contemporaries. Authors like John D. MacDonald, David Goodis, Ed McBain, they all had films or television shows picked up from their novels, but McKimmey never did.
But McKimmey kept his nose to the grinding wheel, and he saw many more of his novels published. Books like The Wrong Ones, 24 Hours to Kill, Squeeze Play, Run If You're Guilty, The Hot Fire, A Circle in the Water, Blue Mascara Tears, The Man with the Gloved Hand, and Buckaroo. Starkhouse reprinted Never Be Caught and Run If You're Guilty as a 2-in-1. McKimmey's mostly known for his crime fiction, but he also dabbled in other genres too. I found a romance novel online that he wrote called The Satire from 1960. It was published by Monarch Books, which is really kind of a low publisher, but he wrote tons of science fiction short stories, and he was even friends with really a critically acclaimed sci-fi author named Philip K. Dick. Did you ever see Blade Runner?
Yeah. No, do androids dream of electric sheep? Philip K. Dick's one of the royalties of paperback science fiction. Yeah, he was a big deal.
Tom, apparently the two of them became friends and also pen pals, and a lot of the letters that they wrote to each other is online. You can read them, but at one point, they're such good buddies that Philip Dick asked McKimmey and his wife to move into his house. He figured that the four of them could live cheaper than just him and his wife. So,
there's probably a novel in that as well.
Right. But before we get any hate mail, that Long Ride was published in 1961. I'm sure somebody out there is going to send us a comment. But that's all for James McKimmey. We'll continue to read and review his books here at paperbackwarrior.com. Really looking forward to reading more of his stuff. My sources for this feature included an article by Jason Starr called Writing is a Lonely Business, James McKimmey, Philip K. Dick, and the Lost Art of Author Correspondence in the Los Angeles Review of Books, November 3rd, 2014. Thanks to Lee Goldberg for finding that article for me. Also, NebraskaAuthors.org, Stark House Press, and Dark Worlds Quarterly Magazine's website. That's it for that. Tom, why don't you jump into your review for this episode?
Okay, good. The book I want to review is called The Girl from Addis. That's Addis. It's by a guy named Ted Alberry. Ted Alberry lived from 1917 to 2005. He served as a United Kingdom, a British intelligence officer from 1940 to 1947. During World War II, he infiltrated Nazi Germany via parachute and was later caught and tortured by communists, smuggling spies between East and West Germany. He began writing espionage fiction with a heavy dose of realism at age 55 and went on to publish 40 novels in the genre. Now, my first book that I read by him was this 1984 standalone paperback called The Girl from Addis. The story is narrated by our hero, Johnny Grant, a British MI6 operative during World War II. Now, back in 1941, Johnny was stationed as a spy in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, targeting a wealthy Armenian who was supplying the Japanese with fuel and arms during World War II. Now, before he could get the job done, Johnny's cover is blown and he has 48 hours to leave Ethiopia or get killed. So that's the background. Johnny left MI6 and embarked on a far more interesting career as a photographer of swimsuit models. And every now and then, he uses this as a cover to take freelance spy assignments from his old employer. So we rejoin Johnny decades later in the 1970s. His old Armenian target seems to be getting cozy with the Soviets. The Brits want Johnny to return to Ethiopia to finish the job he started 25 years ago, neutralizing this Armenian before this and the plans that the Soviets have before someone gets hurt. Now, as you may have gathered, this isn't some death ray from the sky espionage fiction like Nick Carter Killmaster or a gadget-heavy spy story like a James Bond movie. Instead, Alberry crafted a more cerebral and realistic paperback. Despite being rather smart, though, it's not ever boring. The brinksmanship is fascinating thanks to the fact that Alberry's writing is just staggeringly good. He explains the geopolitics of Ethiopia with this clarity that makes its dumbest reader like me feel like an expert. If I ever go to like a cocktail party, I can speak so intelligently about Ethiopian politics. And you're going to get your spy fiction set pieces at the paperback's climax. Back in Ethiopia, Johnny quickly becomes beguiled and infatuated with a mixed-race woman sharing Greek and Somali background. The problem is that she is a kept woman from the local KGB colonel, this really loathsome villain. This book was fantastic. It was weighty and thought-provoking and had so much substance squeezed into 191 paperback pages. Alberry was a genius writer who really deserves to be rediscovered. Now, 5 of his novels have been reprinted by some outfit called Dover Publications, but unfortunately, The Girl from Addis was not one of them. You're going to need to seek out an old paperback to enjoy it. If you like smart and realistic spy stories, you're not going to regret it. Now, I started a few other of Alberry's novels since I read this one, and none of them really grabbed me, so I need the listeners' help here. If there is a book of his that is regarded as his masterpiece beyond this one, I need you to reach out and let me know, because I have almost all of his books, and I really want to read his greatest hits. So, Eric, that was The Girl from Addis by Ted Alberry, and you go ahead now. Tell us what you want to review.
So I'm going to do House of Evil, which was published in 1954 by Lion Books. And it was reprinted a few years ago by Stark House Press as a 3-in-1 with 2 other obscure novels. House of Evil is by Claire and Michael Lippman, a husband and wife duo. I'm not sure if they ever wrote anything else other than a few shorts for the Ellery Queen zine. The opening line of this book is it's awesome. The opening line reads, "The girl at the Red Parrot was a slut."
I like that.
And, of course, the book quickly brings us up to speed on this slutty girl named Nina, and she's a prostitute at a club called the Red Parrot. Makes sense. Nina is a heroin junkie, and she ends up needing a fix, so she decides she's going to take on a really rough client. because he's going to pay her a little bit more money. Everyone knows this guy is really rough on women and abuses them. And sure enough, he beats up Nina, and he ends up strangling her to death. So Nina was living with a girl named Joyce. So the book kicks into high gear when Joyce's boyfriend stops by. No one's home, but he goes inside and he finds Nina's dead body on the floor. It's the old wake up and find a corpse in your bed sort of thing. It fills up like half the crime fiction we read. So Roman then becomes the man on the run instead of just calling the police to notify them of a dead body he just found. So Roman's the gumshoe, and he's trying to find the killer to clear his name. At the same time, the authors inject that Nina's killer is thinking these really weird things. So you kind of get thrust into the mind of Nina's killer, and man, he thinks of some really weird stuff. We're talking like bodies on hooks and dead babies and just nutty stuff. So Roman teams up with a stripper to find the killer before he ends up targeting Roman's girlfriend, Joyce. So this was more like a dark suspense novel than just straight up crime noir. And Tom, it reminded me of something like Richard Matheson would write or Robert Bloch, maybe even Dean Koontz in a way. It's 150 pages, so it's a really easy read. I really liked it, and I think you will too. Again, this is House of Evil by Claire and Michael Lippman. It's available from Starkhouse Press, and man, I feel like today has just been a commercial for Starkhouse Press.
Well, they do a nice job with what they do. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's show. Be sure to follow us at paperbackwarrior.com each weekday for a brand new book or story review. Stay active on our social media pages, and more importantly, read. On behalf of Eric, we are saying so long for now. I cannot wait to see what we have in store for episode 100. We'll come up with something nice. Thanks for listening, and be cool.